Hello and welcome to the White Butterfly Effect podcast. Today we have Meghan Alexander, wife of Ben and mummy to Archie, who's going to talk us through her journey of her pregnancy with Archie and his short life afterwards. Just to start the interview, I just want you to be nice and relaxed and all, Meghan.
Okay.
So are you okay to talk us a wee bit through your pregnancy with Archie? How was that for you? Talk to us about whenever you first found out you were pregnant.
So when I first found out, I was all the mix of emotions. Delighted, scared, nervous.
First time mummy?
Yeah, first
Okay.
time mummy, worried about what I couldn't eat, and messaging my mummy, asking her what what the ins and outs were and things. And then there was just such a build up of excitement with Ben and things like that as well. First time daddy.
Yeah, how long were you married at this point? Were you?
So we weren't even married a year. It was a couple of months after we got married. We got married in the July of 2023, and I fell pregnant with Archie in the September.
Oh, lovely. So really quite quickly.
Yes. And that was beautiful. I also think I didn't think about how hard other people might have it, in terms of trying to conceive. And I feel really, really grateful and really fortunate to have conceived so quickly.
And this is the thing, Meghan, I think sometimes as we grow up, as we're going through school, going through secondary school, we very much are told you need to protect yourself or you'll get pregnant straight away.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the time that actually isn't the case for people. So the fact that you're sitting there saying, well, actually it did happen quite quickly for us and we're really grateful for it. Not everybody realises that, in fact, a lot of people do struggle to get pregnant. So you were very fortunate in this instance that it happened quite quickly for you guys.
I was, and we just fell head over heels in love with our wee baby. We were so excited, and every scan was just another opportunity to find out something more, to build a piece of the puzzle that we now call Archie. For Ben to bond with him in that way too. To listen to his heartbeat, see the pink line, on the scan, to have the shock, the daddy shock, as I call it. And then we got to the 20-week scan.
Okay.
And that is where a sonographer had told us that there was she called it a fuzzy picture of the heart. She'd said that it was an unclear picture. And that she needed to refer me on to fetal cardiology to get a clear image of the heart.
So, and at this point, was there any concerns from your end? Did you think there's anything wrong? Or
so I asked her if there were issues with his feet, his femur bone, or his skull, because I'd known that in conjunction with congenital heart defects could be a marker for a genetic disorder. And I just wanted to get a clearer picture and understanding of that. And she had said no, that there was nothing, that the feet were perfect, the femur bone was perfect, the skull, there was nothing that she could see.
So that was quite reassuring.
Yes, it was. And then flash forward to, I think it was 22 weeks when we then went to fetal cardiology.
So you were with, I take it was just the standard maternity unit getting your scan done, and then they decided that they were going to refer you on, but you had to wait 2 weeks for that appointment.
Yes.
It's a long enough wait too. Whenever you're first time mummy, probably trying to do everything by the book and just wanting to see your baby again.
It was so anxiety inducing, and I remember people saying to me, "Don't worry, it'll just be another opportunity for you to see your baby." And so I suppose I really tried to go into this appointment with that hat on, and the reassurance that I had received from that original sonographer at Lagan Valley had made me go, it's going to be okay. It's another opportunity to see my boy, and it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, and at that point, scans are really exciting, aren't they? Because it's all you have is getting these scans and getting to see the wee movement, seeing where the wee hands are at. And it is, I know for me as a first time mummy, it was magical, really, really magical going to them scans and
getting to see that level of detail.
Absolutely, it's phenomenal.
We had a little bit of a scare at the very beginning of our pregnancy where we'd gone for a private scan, and been told that the sonographer couldn't see Archie properly.
Okay.
And it said, look, he's too small. You know, your child baby's too small. And
that can happen at around that
yes.
5-week mark. Sometimes I know that some clinics will see you then, but they can struggle to find what they need to be seeing.
So she had told us that she'd recommended that we go to the early pregnancy clinic at the Ulster, and we did do that, but there was a 1 week wait for that. And I just remember thinking, oh my word, is this going to be, you know, an early loss? Am I going to lose my little baby? And the scare and the like anxiety and nervousness that came with
sick
that
feeling
too.
in the stomach.
Yes. Yeah. And then they'd confirmed that actually I was I was earlier on in my pregnancy than what I'd thought.
Okay.
Which taught me something about, you know, just waiting for those scans and things like that too. But I suppose I hadn't recognised that as being traumatic until I'd sat in the Royal waiting for that scan with fetal cardiology, where on one hand I was seeing it as an opportunity to see my child again, to be an excited, you know, first time mummy again. But on the other hand was going, oh my word, this feels just like that scan, and that same anxiety coming back as well. And we were brought in by a fetal cardiology nurse who'd said to us, so, you know why you're here. Do you understand that you're here because of the heart? And I'd said, yes, to get a clearer image of the heart. And she said, and the feet and the femur bone.
Oh.
And I went, oh, no, that's not what we were told. We were actually told everything was okay with the feet and the femur bone.
Specifically asked?
Because I'd specifically asked. And she said, you know, then I was still under my maiden name. So she said, are you Meghan Conway? And I confirmed that I was. And she'd said, no, this is the report that's been written. And it was, I think, she'd said 2-paragraph long report where the original sonographer had said that she had concerns over his feet and his femur bone and had flagged that as being markers. And so this was a huge shock. And then that per fetal cardiology nurse as well, it wasn't her fault. You know, she wasn't the one that had given that information, but she had to send us back into the waiting room with other expectant mummies, which was hard for her to do and hard for us to then do and go
you've
back
been hit with
and
this
sit.
massive shock, like that you were coming to this appointment thinking they're probably just going to scam me. They'll see the heart properly and everything will be fine.
Yeah, well, I'd had so many friends go, Meghan, it's just another opportunity to see your boy. And, you know,
like, why would you question it, really?
Yes.
You know, you have no real reason to, especially when you had been reassured that everything was okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So you go back out to the waiting room, sitting with other mummies, and what was the conversation between you and Ben at that point?
Ben went very quiet, as he usually would.
Processing everything?
He was just processing it all and taking it all in. I remember turning to Ben and with my teacher hat on and all the like special educational needs experience that I have, I just sat and I said to Ben, I think this is, I remember saying to him, I think it could be Down syndrome. I think this is what it is. And Ben went, why do you think that? And I just went, it must be, this is what it is, but it's going to be okay. I have had pupils with Down syndrome. I've had pupils with autism spectrum disorder. You know, and so on, and other genetic conditions as well. I know autism spectrum disorder is not a genetic condition, but I suppose there was something trying to protect me there in that moment, and protect Ben as well. And I was trying to tell him, I think this is what's coming, and it's going to be okay, and we're going to be okay. We can do this. And then we were brought into that room where we were given our scan with fetal cardiology, and it was revealed to us that the first or the initial diagnosis was truncus arteriosus, which basically meant that Archie had a common arterial trunk. And I'm not medical. I think Kathy had spoken, so I'm not medical, so I won't go into all the ins and outs of the diagnosis. But it was terrifying, and we were told that he was inevitably going to need open heart surgery. We were also told that there were going to be certain markers where, if, for example, he had Edwards syndrome, or there were any further issues with the heart that were
Okay.
discovered post birth, he would not be able to have the surgery. With Edwards syndrome, it's considered unethical to operate,
Okay.
and obviously, if the heart
So,
defects were too complex,
yeah.
then it would also be deemed inappropriate to operate.
So Ben and yourself went in that morning with excitement of seeing your baby again, and left being told that your baby boy was extremely sick.
Yeah.
Things took a massive turn very, very quickly for you. Okay,
Yeah.
so how do you deal with that? Like, what was the conversation like in the car? Like, what was there a plan in place?
Fetal
even?
cardiology were, throughout the whole journey, they were amazing, and they had to deliver some of the worst piece of information to us.
Yeah.
So it's a real credit and strength to them that they were
And they're
as
in the Royal,
incredible
is
as
that
they
right?
were. They are.
Yeah.
They are in the Royal. And we had a fantastic team looking after us. Absolutely outstanding. They'd brought us into a counselling room.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at a sofa in that room and saying to Ben, I'm not sitting down there. If I sit down there, that's where the doom and gloom happens. That's where
Yeah.
they're going to look at us,
Yeah.
and the crying happens and the doom and gloom. And it felt like I was on a movie set.
Yeah, complete.
It felt surreal. It felt like at some point somebody was going to pinch me and go, "It's all over. It's just a really bad nightmare.
Yeah.
It's okay." They left us alone, Ben and I together in that room, and I just remember taking this really long, deep breath and then looking at Ben, going, "We've got to turn back to God here. Like we were." My faith is so important to me and to Ben as well. And I remember looking at Ben and saying, "We've got to talk to Gibbo, our pastor."
There's so much strength in that as well, Meghan. In that moment, like I've shared in the past with the moment where I was getting the scan, and silence in the scan room, and I wouldn't say I'm an overly religious person, but in that moment, I remember closing my eyes and praying that something was wrong, that somebody's got something wrong here. And at that point, I had been told that the scanner wasn't working, and straight away, I'll never forget it. Like just praying as hard as I possibly could. I'm thinking, please make this be wrong. Please make this be wrong. And I think for you and for Ben, who does have such a strong faith, it's so important to come together in that moment and turn to your faith.
Yeah. And it really held us.
Yeah.
It's what kept us up. Our church family were just incredible. They got behind us from the very beginning. We had so many people praying all over the world as well. I was quite public with what was going on to a degree. But I'd shared on my social media that we'd had this diagnosis, and I asked people to pray, and I asked people to believe in the possibility of a miracle as well, and also recognize that there was going to be a lot of noise, and what I meant by that and mean by that still is that a lot of people were going to come in with their opinions, and a lot of people were and doctors were going to be delivering some of the worst news and information to us, and I just wanted to know that I would be able to hear God's voice throughout it all.
To keep
me standing. To keep me standing and keep me going. And I really did, and I really felt like, throughout the whole thing, God was like, focus on what you can't see, not on what you can. So every time a scan photo came up and a doctor had said to me, we can see something else with the feet, or we can see something else with his femur bone, I just sat there and was like, focus on what you can't see. You can't see faith. You can't physically see God, but for me,
he was very much.
Very
God was
present.
very much there and very much holding.
There were
you
so
and Ben
many
together.
beautiful moments. There was a journey of hope, and then having hope taken away. We had opted not to have an amniocentesis, which would have told us if Archie did have
Yeah.
one of the three main like
Syndromes,
trisomy
yeah.
syndrome. So it would have ruled out Edwards syndrome for us, and I chose not to go ahead with that. But a doctor who was I'd agreed to be part of a research program
Okay.
with a registrar in field medicine who was exploring the effects of carrying a baby with a congenital heart defect on the mum and vice versa.
Okay.
And she had done a scan where she had seen his feet, and he'd kicked, and whatever way he'd kicked his feet and he'd flexed his feet, she was able to see that it wasn't possible for him to have had any issues with the feet, for him to have had rocker bottom heel, which is what
Wow.
they were looking for.
So
So
it
she
just happened
discovered
to be that she captured that moment
yeah,
while
he
she was
just kicked.
scanning.
He kicked
What is
while
the
she
chances?
was scanning. Yeah, and it was just so beautiful. And that was an answered prayer. And then there was other pieces of the puzzle. His femur bone, antenatally, or with the antenatal scans, your regular scans, that she would go for, I suppose, they were saying to us, no, this femur bone is it's actually measuring quite long. And I had somebody say to me, has anybody said to you that we think your boy's going to be quite big? And I went, no, because they've said up in field medicine, they'd said the opposite, and they'd said, we think he's going to be quite small, which would be the norm for a baby with cardiac issues. And then flash forward to when Archie was born. And I remember sitting in ICU with him and thinking, oh my word, am I being completely blinded here as his mummy? Because I'm just looking at him and thinking, look at my beautiful, beautiful boy. But there's nothing wrong with there were no issues with the feet. There were no issues with the femur bone. And I turned to her nurse and I said to her, can you see any issues with his length? Can you see any issues with his femur bone, with his feet? And she went, no. And she went, sure, did you not hear, the woman who pulled him out whenever I had my C-section? The doctor had said, oh my word, I pulled him out, and it was like he just kept coming.
Yeah.
And he just kept rising. And so all those predictions.
So that was all wrong.
All the fetal medicine's predictions were wrong. Yeah.
Wow.
Even including the heart condition, which they'd gotten slightly right.
Yeah.
But it wasn't totally accurate. And it just shows there is a bias there when people are scanning.
Yeah.
And if somebody is looking at that scan through the lens of this is a child with a congenital heart defect, and potentially with, other markers for genetic disorder, they're going to look for those things. And when they're measuring, they're going to look, there is a bias there. And I suppose, I hope that would help anybody who's going for a scan to know that there are, those doctors are also humans too. And those scans, as great as they are
be
not
wrong.
Yeah, they can be wrong, and they're not,
probably the majority of the time they are right.
Yes.
But in this situation, they weren't, and therefore, for anybody who is listening, it would probably be worthwhile if you have that gut instinct that actually, it's okay to question things.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And to remember, I have doctor friends, and I know they won't mind me saying they're not gods.
Yeah.
They are human beings that are trying to do a job, and they're trying to do the best by you, but they're not,
Yeah, this is it. They're still
God.
human at the end of the day. Like, I mean,
so they're capable of getting things wrong, and right.
Yeah.
And in this instance, those predictions were wrong. Ben's much shorter than I am, and so we joke that Archie looked exactly like Ben. You look at his face, and people had said to me, "Oh my word, you just birthed a baby Benjamin."
Yeah.
And then he had the longest legs.
So we got that from his mummy.
And he got that from his mummy. And yeah, it like those things were wrong, and I just think to myself,
it's so bizarre that the one thing that you had asked about, like, people wouldn't know those, but I wouldn't have known to ask about the femur bone. You asked about it, you were told there was nothing wrong. Then your notes were passed over to say there was something wrong, and you were told there was something wrong, and then it turned out whenever Archie was born that actually there wasn't.
Yeah.
So then toward right, so at the 22 weeks stage of your pregnancy, that was quite scary.
Mhm.
You didn't know what the rest of that pregnancy was going to look like.
Mhm.
How was that for you and Ben at that point? What was going through your heads? Like,
Um, it was terrifying. It then led to appointments every 2 weeks at the Royal, and eventually every week towards the end.
okay,
We used to joke that we could have pitched a tent in the Royal car park. I'm
Yeah.
sure if you've had any experience of
oh yeah,
going to the Royal, you know how
I
difficult
think
it is to get
everybody knows.
car parking space
Yeah,
in the Royal. Um,
and I suppose it's important just to set the scene as well, Megan. You're a teacher.
yes, yeah,
So therefore, you're very restricted in the times that you can probably get out of work and stuff. So all those
yes, yeah,
appointments, as much as you wouldn't have not been,
yeah.
it has an effect on you as well.
It has,
Like, you
and the
know,
pupils as well that I'm teaching too, and that was hard
yeah,
because as a teacher, like I care so much about them,
yeah,
and I was having to take a day off work every week, you know, or every two
yeah,
weeks, and go to my head of department who was absolutely fantastic and very supportive of me, and had said to me, no, like you go, you need to
yeah.
be out, and the way it worked, I would have been back for 2:45, you know, in the
Yeah.
afternoon. So there was no
The
way that I
day
could
was
come
over
back.
pretty
The day
much.
was over.
Yeah.
But I suppose in a way I'm glad that I could have had that I had those days to just process that information because
Yeah.
there's so much that goes on in all of those scans, as I talked, you know, earlier. You're building up pieces of a puzzle.
Yeah.
And you've got your puzzle pieces here, and then you've got your puzzle pieces here, and you're just trying to come up with some sort of
Frantically,
picture in the middle.
frantically
Yeah.
put them all together
Yeah.
and hope that you're
And
going to have an idea of what this is
yeah.
all going to look like for you.
Mhm.
So at any point up till we'll get to the stage of delivery.
Mhm.
At any point up until delivery, what what was your thoughts? Did you think things are he is going to be a sick baby? He is going to need some help, or where was you and Ben's head at that point?
So 2 weeks prior to delivery, we'd had our final scan with fetal cardiology.
And what week was that?
37, I think,
37, right,
37,
okay.
because Archie was born 39 plus
Yeah.
5. And the fetal cardiologist consultant had said that he was completely bewildered with what he'd seen. Which was interesting to me because I'd prayed, you know, silently in my mind that he would be puzzled, but in a positive way. And I suppose that there was a sense of like me again trying to protect myself. I knew I was going to have to deliver, you know, I was going to have to go through birth with
Yeah.
my baby, and that I needed some hope to get me through. But I also didn't want to be walked through a rose garden. I didn't want to be lied to either. And he
Yeah.
was very good with that. He was very good at just telling you what he'd seen
Yeah.
and being very honest. And he'd said, "Look, I'm a bit puzzled," and he'd explained that. I think throughout the third trimester, as Archie had gotten bigger, his back was facing outwards, so
Yeah.
facing out through my stomach, and that his back had then been casting shadows over the heart. They couldn't get a clear image.
Okay.
But what they had said to us is that they thought the diagnosis had potentially changed slightly, where it was still truncus arteriosus, but they weren't sure whether it was type 1 or type 2.
Okay.
And that really was just a surgical thing. It was an
Yeah.
academic thing, really.
What is it? Do you know what the difference is between type 1 and type 2?
It's the easiest way for me to explain it is that is to talk about there being different levels.
Okay.
I'm not medically trained at
Right,
all
okay.
or scientifically minded, but I think the easiest way to think of it is that there are different levels. Type 1 being the lowest level, type 3 being the most complex,
Okay.
and it's really for to explain to the surgical team how complex the surgery is going to be.
Right, okay.
But we were very much geared towards, right, okay, our child is going to have open heart surgery when he is born. He will be going to Dublin, he'll be having that surgery, and potentially then a 10 months old having closed heart surgery as well.
Okay.
We were geared up for
So you knew there was going to be complexities.
Archie's going to be a
Yeah.
very sick baby. Yeah.
Yeah.
When he was born, I suppose what was strange is that he was a very sick baby, but he didn't look ill.
He looked like a healthy
So
baby.
that was also
Yeah.
strange for us. It was hard for me to come to terms with this is a baby, this is my baby who requires open heart surgery, but he's
Just
lying
looks
in
so
that incubator,
perfect.
and he is, some of the nurses were saying, oh my word, like his oxygen saturation levels are better than, or healthier than most adults.
Yeah.
And that was just an indicator of how the heart had grown and which
Yeah.
side, it had favoured. So Archie's heart favoured his lungs.
Yeah.
So he did look very much like a healthy newborn. It was very hard to be able to tell that he had a heart condition.
Yeah.
And then we'd been told that things with the heart had changed after he'd been born. We were told that they discovered an interrupted aortic arch, which again, I won't go into because I'm not medical at all. But it basically meant that everything had become much more complex. He was still put down for surgery. A consultant had spoken to us on the 5th of June on my birthday and explained to me that the mortality rate for the surgery had dropped to 40%, and that some surgeons wouldn't enter into surgery with that information.
Okay.
So we were really sunk then.
Yeah.
We really thought, oh my word, okay, is he going for the surgery? What's happening now? And about 20 minutes later, a nurse that was looking after Archie came and explained to me that the surgeon in Dublin had requested that Archie be brought down to Dublin that day.
Okay.
And that that the NISTAR team, so the Children's Ambulatory team, were going to be taking Archie by himself to Dublin.
So you weren't able to travel with him?
No. And that was maybe 48 hours post-birth, because Archie was born quite late in the evening on the Monday, and this was the Wednesday morning. Unbelievably
Megan, that's
difficult.
really, really difficult. Like, you've got your baby here. Like you say, he looks like a healthy baby, and then for you to be separated for a full journey to Dublin.
Yes. Yeah.
So did you follow the ambulance? Or
So,
what way did that work? Because obviously, like, you're a mummy who's just had a section.
Yes.
And very, very sore.
I'd had an emergency section, and yeah, so the NISAR team had come about 2 hours later. I'd chosen to stay with Archie until that time.
Yeah.
I couldn't bear to be separated from him, knowing that I was already going to be separated from him at that point.
Yeah.
They'd taken him, and then Ben and I went back to my ward so that I could be discharged from the Royal, and that took just over 45 minutes.
Okay.
So that was really tough, really difficult. I think the staff that were looking after me didn't really understand what was going on.
Yeah, that you just wanted out of there to follow this ambulance.
Yes.
You don't want your child in Dublin on his own.
I could be wrong. I don't think my notes were really read. I don't think they knew what was going on with Archie, despite that being in my green folder. And I think that I was just trying to give them a very rushed explanation into why I needed to leave, and needed to leave immediately. Ben and I then went back home, packed the car full of things, and off we went. And we arrived maybe an hour or 2 hours after Archie had already been there. Now, Archie did have to have a CT scan when he was there, and I think an MRI as well. No, not an MRI, but he had other scans there as well. So we wouldn't have been able to have been with him for those things. But just having to get there, then having to find my baby, find out where he was, what ward he'd been taken to.
And were you given a reason why you couldn't travel with him? What was the reason?
2 reasons. The first being that there were, I think, 2 paramedics that were travelling with Archie in the ambulance at the time. And I suppose things can get quite busy. If there is an emergency there, it's distressing to the mum or the father that's travelling with the child. But the other reason was because I'd had the section. Having the emergency section meant that they didn't feel comfortable with taking me with, and the legalities of all of that as well. So it was red tape, really, a lot of red tape, and it meant that then I couldn't go in that ambulance.
I'm just thinking, Megan, like, I know the pain after a section. I know how uncomfortable it is. I know that if you have to cough, it really is very, very painful. And you travelled to Dublin. Straight after a section. You have to have been in so much pain, like, travelling down that road.
I was, and they'd given me some medication, but there were certain things they couldn't give me
Yeah.
to leave with. So yeah, I was in
Yeah.
agony, physically and mentally. But
You had to
I
do
do it
it.
again
It's,
if I had to
yeah,
do it for
like,
my boy.
of course.
And I think so would any mum. You
Yeah.
would do whatever you have to do for your
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
But then we'd gone there. I had a phone call that night from Archie's consultant in Belfast, to remind me of um my strength is, and she said you're really strong, and she told me that everything, it was going to be okay, and to just hold on to hope that it was going to be okay. To remember that the pictures that I'd seen of babies in an ICU with ventilators and things that they might
So
have
they had
needed.
you prepped for
They
what
had
he
me
might look
prepped
like.
for
Yeah.
what he might look like post surgery, and Archie was also 8 pounds 1 when he was born,
So he was
he
a
was
good
quite
weight,
a
yeah.
good weight for
And
any
not a small
yeah,
baby.
not a small baby at all, not
Yeah.
a small baby at all. And she had reminded me that his weight stood him in
Yeah.
good stead, really. That if he was to lose weight,
Yeah.
things would be okay, and to be prepared for that. And that really set me up then for him having that surgery. We were in
Yeah.
Dublin. He was going to have that surgery. So when I went to bed that night, my prayers were all oriented around, right, God,
Surgery.
my son's going to have the surgery, and please just hold him and keep him safe, and give
Yeah.
all those surgeons the wisdom that they need
Yeah.
to get through that surgery. Woke up the next morning, was told to, Ben and I were told to go and have breakfast because the surgeons were going to be doing, their rounds soon, and speaking to parents. So Ben and I had gone and done that. I remember sitting and having a bowl of Rice Krispies, because it was never something that I would have eaten, but I was just,
Whatever.
exhausted.
Yeah.
And I remember that because it was only half an hour, maybe 45 minutes later, that a team of 6 to 7 staff members had walked through the doors of Archie's room. And they sat us down, and that surgeon.
It's quite frightening too.
Yeah, it
So
is.
many
It
medical
is, but I
professionals come
suppose
in.
I thought I didn't think anything of the fact that so many walked in, because I was so used to. I mean, Ben and I had like every week discussions about surgery.
Yeah.
So this was just, in our eyes, another conversation about the surgery that he was going to have,
Yeah.
with a little bit more information about, the ins and outs of that surgery. And that is really how it went. So it was half an hour long conversation, where, well, to me it was anyway.
Yeah.
It could have been shorter.
All sense of time kind of goes out the window.
It
in those
does. And
situations.
he's gotten out a sheet of paper. He'd drawn the heart for us in the same way that the fetal cardiology team had done for us throughout the pregnancy. He'd explained the surgery. He'd explained what could be done. And then he started to explain what couldn't. And then he ended the conversation and he said, I'm really sorry, but his heart is inoperable. We can't operate.
And the whole way through this conversation, Megan, you're thinking, because he told you what could be done, this is a possibility, yeah?
Yeah, I was thinking, okay.
Okay, we know that.
I never even questioned whether it was a possibility or not.
Because
because
you were down
it
there
was
for surgery.
we were down there, and I thought, nobody's going to bring us down to Dublin if the surgery's not happening.
Not at such a crucial time.
Yeah, they've brought us to Dublin because he's having surgery. And even though that consultant had said, the mortality rate, like, things have changed, I thought, they're not going to bring us down to Dublin if he's not having the surgery. And Ben and I had settled with this idea that any trauma that we were going to face was going to be to do with watching our child go through something so
traumatic. Surgery, like a tiny
physically,
baby.
A tiny little baby.
And I suppose that's what you'd always prepared for.
Yeah.
Even like from week 22. Week 22, you had prepared, like, this might be possible.
Yeah.
And went down to Dublin armed with, we know this is possible, we've seen all the images, we kind of know what to expect, but we're here and we're ready to take it on.
Yeah.
Nearly. Yeah. To then be told, we can't operate. Like, I don't know, Megan, how you were in that situation, but if I was to try and put myself in your shoes, I think I would have wanted to scream the hospital down. Why are you not doing something?
I remember straight away, I looked at the surgeon, and I said to him, "Okay, so he needs a heart transplant. Then when will he be having his heart transplant?" Um, and he just looked at me and he said, "We don't do neonatal heart transplants in the island of Ireland. There aren't enough babies. Never mind babies who could provide a healthy heart for Archie. He can't have that heart transplant. It's not possible." And he just kept saying the words, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry."
Oh, Megan. And I think the fact that he said the island of Ireland nearly makes it worse, because does that mean if he had have been born in England, that potentially, well, I suppose we don't know the ins and outs of that.
Well, I do actually, I suppose, know, because there's another child within, we call it the Hart family.
Yeah.
Because we're very close and connected with the Children's Heartbeat Trust, and with the Hart family, as I call it. There was a mummy actually on just the day that Archie was taken down to Dublin. She'd seen that I didn't have a chair to sit on, and she'd pulled the chair over, and she'd said to me, "Welcome to the Hart family, and here's a chair for you, because you're part of the Hart family, and we look after each other." And it has been that way ever since.
And you need that peer support too, don't you, Megan? Because
massively so.
Because people,
Massively
unless they've been through, a lot of the time, unless they've been through what you've been through, don't fully get it. And that Hart family do get it.
Yeah. Oh, they do.
Yeah.
She was sitting with her own baby, who had been ill, who had been through surgery, but the trauma of all of that too, and been back in the hospital. And she even spoke at the time, I remember, of her own feelings around being in that space and being in a hospital setting as well. But you asked how I felt. I remember wanting to scream, and even listening to Kathy's podcast where she talks about that animalistic scream that left her body. I didn't scream. I had Archie in that room, and I couldn't. I couldn't, because he was there, and it just felt so surreal to have had that information delivered to me with him in the room. And I remember thinking, if he was 5 or if he was 12, would that information have been delivered with him in the room? And I suppose with the benefit of hindsight now, I think it maybe would have been better for them to have delivered that information in a separate room. That's not what happened.
That's your motherly instincts, wanting to protect your boy.
Yeah, wanting to protect him. But also, I would have been then allowed the space to, if I needed to scream, to have screamed. I know I cried, I sobbed on the shoulder of a nurse. That was really, really amazing. Sarah, I'll never forget her name. And I'll never forget how she made me feel as well. And I remember saying to her, I can't survive this. I can't do this. And she looked at me and she'd said, you will. And we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice.
This is the thing, and I'm sure you've been told so many times that you're so strong, you're so brave. What's the alternative? What is the alternative? You have to.
I think
to keep going.
we don't have a choice in going through it, but we do have a choice in how we carry it, I suppose. So I suppose for me now, if somebody says to me, "Oh, you're so strong," I try to just take it as a compliment, because that's what those people are trying to give. And to go, okay, well, I've chosen to make strong choices in my son's name, or to make brave choices in my son's name.
So you went to Dublin. What age was Archie at this time? How many? 2 days. 2 days.
He was 2, or maybe almost 3 days. He would have been 3 days old at the time. It was the 6th. So yes, he was 3 days old whenever we found out that his heart was inoperable. And then we decided to take him back to Clark Ward in the Royal. And then they supported us through making the decision to take him to the hospice, the Northern Ireland Children's Hospice. And that is where Archie spent the last week of his life. And I think it's very hard for people to understand why I would describe Archie's life as very colourful and full of life. When this was a little boy who was dying. But the hospice worked really hard with us to make sure that we could capture some of those memories. We painted his feet. We laughed when there was a nurse who'd squatted down to paint his feet, and he had let out this almighty fart, and full on punami, that I had to go clean up as well because Ben was not for doing that.
Yeah.
Um, and we just laugh, but we still laugh about it all. We
Yeah.
laugh about the fact that there was a nurse who struggled to put a bottle together.
Yeah.
And we laughed with staff about that too. And I think it's shocking for people, I suppose, to hear that we had so much fun.
Fun.
So much fun.
So much fun in those
So much
days.
fun. I mean, there was a photographer who the Children's Heartbeat Trust had helped organise, who came and took photos of Archie, and was just amazing. Like, most warm person, I think.
Yeah,
The
I've
one
seen
that was,
your
like,
photos.
like warm, like people I've ever met, and she got it.
Yeah.
She got that we wanted to make those memories, and she just looked at me and she went, I just want to capture you guys making memories. I am passionate about capturing people, and I just do what you need to do. Like,
And she done that
I'm
so
just
well,
I'm in the
Meghan.
background.
Yeah.
Forget I'm even here. And she but she never was in the background because we just loved her. And it was beautiful to get photos with the grandparents and things too. So Ben's mum and dad had come. My mum and stepdad had come along and got photos. We got photos of Archie in Christmas outfits and Easter outfits. And just
how beautiful.
we sang to him as a family.
Yeah.
We laughed with him. She took videos of me breastfeeding, which was so important to me.
Yeah.
Um,
It's so important to have those
Yeah.
memories. Like, and there's such
Yeah.
important roles there of all those people. Like
Mm.
the hospice. Like, I've heard before of the incredible work that they do. And at the time, like, and I know of people who take photographs as well, and at the time you think it's probably the very last thing that you want to do. But or some people, maybe it's the last thing they want to do, but having those memories is so important. Like we're coming up till a year
Yes.
till it would be Archie's birthday, and a year on, it's lovely to look at all those photos. Like, and your photos are just absolutely stunning. Like, that lady done such a good job. She really did. So you got back to Belfast, you go to the hospice and made the most of your time there. So are you okay to talk about the day that Archie passed?
Yeah, so the day that Archie passed, it was a Sunday. I think I've spoken to you about how healthy Archie looked. And I suppose there's so much positive in that. The fact that we got to know what Archie looked like as Archie. But there's also a side to it where when I see other healthy babies cough, I'm thrown back into all of those moments.
Yeah.
And also when Archie did pass, he did look ill. He was a very sick, very, very sick baby, and that had happened dramatically from the Friday to the Sunday. It declined. He just became very, very weak. He stopped being able to eat on the Friday evening. Which was
awful.
Yeah, totally horrific. To watch your son suffer.
Yeah.
And I've had a few parents say, at least they didn't suffer. Or people say that that maybe haven't been through this, and what I would say to that is you really don't know. And actually, Archie unfortunately did suffer.
Yeah,
he did suffer. Number of reasons for that. But yeah, he ultimately the reasons behind that are not important. What was important is that acknowledging that, I think. And for me, I've had so many people say to me, oh, it's so lovely to see the beautiful photos. Oh, it's so lovely to read your beautiful poems about Archie. And then when I start to talk about the fact that Archie suffered, people back away. And and they draw inwards and they go, no, we don't talk about that. We don't go there. Yeah, that's too difficult. That's too difficult. Because when we talk about death as well, we talk about, did the person die peacefully?
Yeah.
Did they go
and it's
peacefully?
Not always the case.
When on the day that he died, things were peaceful, but they were peaceful because he'd fought so hard to live.
Yeah.
All day on Saturday, I watched my child suffer, scream, cry, starve.
Yeah.
and I couldn't comfort him. There was very little
Nothing
I
you
could
could do.
do but hold him.
Mm.
You know, his temperature dropped, then his temperature rose. All of those things happened. And it's not Archie's whole story, but it's part of his story. And to me, like as his mummy,
I think it's a really
I
important
could
part
not
to talk
acknowledge
about.
that because, you know, you can't have one part of the story without the other. And he had that full human experience. He did suffer. And yeah, acknowledging it has brought me peace. And I suppose in the therapy room with you, being able to share that with you and feeling like I have been heard, I have been seen, that part of his story has been witnessed by somebody who wasn't there.
And
has
I think
been
it's so
amazing
important
for me.
I think it's so important, Megan, that we do talk about these things that are a bit more uncomfortable to talk about, because there will be parents listening who have quite possibly had to mask that they've experienced that as well, because the norm is, oh, well, we'll all believe that our babies didn't suffer, when in some situations that's not always that's not the case. You know, so I think it is very brave of you to talk about that, and very, very forward thinking in that, like, yes, it is part of his story.
I think this is something I'd really like to see, is more parents stepping out and talking about this too. Because it's part of their story. It deserves to be shared. Not everybody has the same personality either. Somebody had talked to me about your character changing throughout grief, and that it just changed. You're not the same person anymore. And in some ways, I believe that is true. And in other ways, I think, you know, that analogy of you grow around your grief is such a good one to use.
Talking about grief, Megan, you have shared something which, and I want to read it out because I think it's just so beautiful, where you have talked about your grief, and you've talked about it takes a village to honour and remember a child too. So we know the saying, it takes a village to raise a child, but I think there's something really profound in what you have said. Like, I know you've posted on socials about this, where it takes a village to honour and remember a child too. Like, as a bereaved mummy, your biggest fear is for people to forget. And you do this so beautifully, I think, where you do keep Archie's memory alive, you do keep his name alive. And at the minute, you are doing a fundraiser for the White Butterfly Foundation, and it's a series of challenges that are giraffe related. Tell us why it's giraffe related.
Okay,
so the wee giraffes are sitting here, and
most people would think of the giraffe legacy as having started when Archie was named at Belfast Zoo. But I suppose for us, as a couple, we had gone on a trip after we'd gotten engaged to South Africa. I'm originally from South Africa. And we'd gone on our first safari together, and it was our happy, joyous time together. And we fell in love with wildlife as a whole and African sunsets. I mean, who couldn't? And then when Archie was born, and just before he was born, we had decorated his nursery to reflect this love for wildlife. And filled it with lions and giraffes and all sorts. And we brought a painting with giraffes on it to the hospice. So they had seen that we loved the giraffes, and one of the nurses had asked whether we wanted to go to the zoo. And initially I had said no way was I taking my boy to the zoo. In my head, he was fresh out of the womb, and there was no way he was going to be going anywhere. And then on the Friday, the 14th of June, I had gone to the nurse and said, I want to take our boy to the zoo. And there was a nurse called Bethany. She came with us and helped us with that. She helped us organise the whole thing. And we'd gone there, and that was the 14th of June. And then on the 14th of July, a giraffe was born at the zoo.
Oh, wow.
And it was announced on Facebook, and there was a big competition to name this giraffe. And I had asked the zoo if it would be okay if the name, initially I'd suggested Bally Bay, where my granddad is from, because Archie was named after my granddad. So I suggested Bay Archie or Archie Bay. And they'd said, well, what about Bally Archie? We know it's not a place in Northern Ireland, and that their tradition is that their giraffes are named after a place in Northern Ireland, so that they can be recognised if they move on. But they'd said, we need to include this in a competition and we need to prepare you for the fact that you might not win. I think they just didn't really know me, Selena.
Yeah, of course. You were always winning
and they
that
didn't
one,
know
Megan.
how competitive my family, my husband, my the community around us. And I want to actually use this opportunity to thank all of the bereaved mummies. And there was just like a team of mums that came to
this community is incredible for supporting each other. Like, and that's what I love about the baby loss community is like we just come together.
Whole team of mummies that just came and they voted and they got excited and we won with 6,500 votes on Facebook and another 1,000 I think on Instagram. So I mean the zoo had gone from I think 60 viewers or something to the other Facebook a day to suddenly it booming. So everybody was just mad for Bally Archie and things. So it was just absolutely incredible. And that is where these giraffe challenges that's where the idea was born.
And they're so much fun. So if anybody's listening, start following Megan and Ben. Like the challenges are just so much fun. Before we move or we wrap up here, Megan, I do want to touch on something probably more serious, but I think it's something that is very important that we talk about, and I think it's probably very important for listeners as well. So after Archie passed, how would you describe your mental health? How was your mental health after that? Like, obviously, you go through a period of grief. And I don't think grief ever leaves us. And you're still in the midst of your grief. But was there any moments between then and now that have frightened you?
Yes. So in the September, so we just come back from South Africa in July, at the end of July.
So you took a trip to South Africa?
Yes, so we'd taken a trip to South Africa and we were actually there while the whole Bally Archie thing was going on. So it was very surreal to have been there and try and push that from the other side of the world. We'd come back and I think that's when grief really started to hit. The flashbacks from all of those really traumatic moments started to hit as well. I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating properly. And I think it was so difficult for my family, my really close family members, to see me going through that, to see me sobbing on the kitchen floor, screaming, doing all of those things that Kathy had spoken about in her original podcast. I will never forget. I don't think we ever forget when that animalistic scream leaves our body. I do think something changes in our brain at that point. And it led me to a very dark place. I was extremely suicidal and I'm very open now about the fact that I did make an attempt to take my own life. And I know that this can be very triggering for other people to hear. But I think that people can assume that there are reasons why I would share that, that I'd be looking for sympathy or a pity. That's not the case at all. But I'm also prepared for those opinions and things too. And I feel that it's important to share that because I believe there could be other mummies out there who are really struggling.
Megan, there are
really, really struggling. And I suppose what I want them to know, the thoughts that were going through my head were that I was worthless, that I had no place where I belonged anymore, that nobody would ever understand me, that nobody would ever hear me or see me. The line that I kept using with Ben was, I have a voice and nobody's listening.
And I don't want to interrupt you, Megan, but what was the support like at this point for you? So whenever you had buried your son, you leave, and what was out there? What support was out there for you? Were you well supported?
Very, very little support from the NHS. I had to make numerous phone calls begging for a midwife to come out to see me at the house, which is what they would usually do if a child lives. Eventually I did get a midwife come out who was very compassionate and very supportive. She checked my C-section
Yeah.
wound at the time to see that it was all healing. She allowed me the space to speak. I then had contacted my GP to explain that I was really struggling with my mental health. And that GP had said to me, "Do you know, there are some women who go through an early loss and they're very matter of fact about it, but there seems to be others who go through this strange grief process. And I'm not sure
Wow.
why." Which was deeply inappropriate.
Dr.
Not
Emma's
okay.
listening. She will not be happy at that comment.
No, she won't. And I suppose I speak about it not to bring criticism to doctors, but to raise awareness really of what's okay and what's not okay. To say
Number
to
one, get
mummy,
your facts right, because you weren't in a strange place grieving an early loss.
Mhm.
Like what? You know,
yeah,
like,
there's
that would
layers
be
to what
all-
he
that
there's
would be on
layers to
your-
what he said, because
Yeah.
even if I was,
Like, exactly.
I mean, do you know, that's a little like
Absolutely. Like your
dream a
scenario,
baby, you know, and
like there was so much happening there in that he was completely disregarding early loss. Early loss can be absolutely. I know where he's coming from. Some people, it's not absolutely crippling, but for other people, it is
It
absolutely
is, yeah.
crippling. My loss would be wouldn't have been classed as an early loss. I've had 2 early losses,
Mhm.
which were both very, very traumatic, and I've had a later loss, which is classed as a miscarriage as much as I delivered him, and I find a GP like referring a strange grief process. I just find that really bizarre.
Yeah,
Like, you know,
and I do think that it would be so good to see further education around
absolutely.
baby loss, neonatal loss, early loss,
Miscarriage,
whatever it may be,
Yeah.
for GPs, because this isn't the first time. I'm
Yeah.
sure that you've heard those things being said to another mummy, or had those things being said yourself. But yeah, I was then referred to mental health team through the NHS, and offered low level DBT or
Yeah.
CBT,
Yeah.
which it didn't work for me at all. If anything, I think it made it worse for me, and I don't think that was the intention. But I do think that there is a need for specialist support
Yeah.
within
absolutely.
Northern Ireland for bereaved parents,
Yeah.
and that is why I'm such a big supporter
Oh,
of what you do,
yeah.
and what you are trying to what your goal is, what you're trying to achieve,
Yeah.
to have specialist therapists
People
throughout
who
all of those trusts
understand.
in Northern Ireland,
Yeah.
and make sure that nobody's left behind, that nobody is stuck in the trenches on their own,
Yeah.
feeling the way I did and the way I'm sure others are, that they're on their own.
Yeah. Do you know what, Megan? It's so important that you do. Like, there's so many reasons why I think it's so important that you share that. One of the reasons being that you were actually the reason why this podcast was decided upon, because me and you spoke one day and you shared your journey of suicide. And I remember for the last 4 years I've been saying we're going to lose a mummy to suicide because they cannot cope with this grief. Since then I now know that daddies are struggling as well, but there didn't seem to be a lot happening. And then whenever you told me your story, I was like, do you know what? I know there's other mummies out there, there's other daddies out there that need to hear this. So I just want to thank you so, so much, Megan, for coming on and being so honest and being so brave. There's absolutely nothing easy about coming on and sharing your whole story, like every single part of it. And I'm so grateful that you did, because you've come on and you've shared the really lovely, fun, joyous memories, but also the memories that are a wee bit more difficult.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Is there anything else, Megan, you would like to just say to the listeners before we shut this off, or do you think we've covered most things?
I think just a reminder that they're not really alone, and that if they reach out to the White Butterfly Foundation, they'll find a community who will never let people forget their babies' names. Their names will be splashed across tiles. They will be celebrated in Stormont. They will be celebrated in your homes. Conversations will be started because people will see those tiles, and that thought of, will my baby be forgotten?
Absolutely not.
be completely taken away from you,
Oh,
because
that means a lot to me, Megan, too, because like this is what the White Butterfly Foundation is about. Our strapline is for bereaved parents by bereaved parents, and it's all about remembering all these little ones. So thank you so much, Megan.
Yeah,
Thank you
you.
for coming on. Thank you.